From the book Snow Angels by Harriet Loveday. Title story, Snow Angels. Lena stood shivering by the corner of Atif's convenience shop alongside a busy road in a busy suburb in a busy city. Her light blue eyes looked up to the menacing grey clouds above her. Den had told her this morning that there would be snow today, and he'd reminded her to take her coat. Lena pulled the thinned wind cheater jacket a little closer to her skinny body, at the bulges in the hidden pockets creating strange-looking lumps about her torso. She wasn't any warmer, but the act felt comforting. She cowered back a little further into the corner of the shop front, next to the alley, trying to get out of the way of the busy shoppers and let her thin blonde hair fall around her face. Perhaps they were shopping for Christmas presents. Perhaps they were shopping for food. Perhaps they were shopping for what she had to sell. There wasn't exactly a type. Usually it was people she'd met before, but sometimes it was someone she didn't know, someone that knew to look for her. Lena glanced nervously over at the overactive shop door. A sign lay in wait outside to trap customers back inside, proclaiming, "Fresh milk." A cold wave of terror rushed down through her body, and the contents of her empty tummy rushed up to meet it before she expertly buried the thought, before she was even conscious of it. Lena looked away. "Selling?" a guy asked quietly beside her. She hadn't even noticed him in the crowds. She wasn't bothered. It was just a job, right? She quickly looked him up and down. He was short and stocky, clean. He had a black hoodie pulled up over his head and grey jogging bottoms. His trainers were trendy and white. 50 or 100, she asked. 100, love, but not here. Don't want to be seen. He nodded around the corner, behind her, to the alley. 100, that would be good. If she could just get a few more customers like him, she could go back to Den's flat and get out of the cold. She hated the alley, though. It was always a risk. 100, but no alley, she said. Sorry, too much of a risk. He smiled kindly in regret and turned to walk away. He seemed nice. Okay, alley. Let's be quick, though. Lena knew there were cameras around the shop front, but she also knew she could be discreet carrying out these sorts of transactions. She was only doing this for him, because he clearly didn't know how to do this. 20 minutes later, Lena stumbled out of the alley into the cold December afternoon light. She wiped at the blood on her nose. Her jacket was ripped. Her body was ripped. Her soul had broken long ago. At least he couldn't take that. The alley was a dead end, so she had to come out eventually. Not that anyone cared. They didn't look at her. Not that they'd looked at her when she'd still had bulges in her pockets. No one noticed. She should have insisted that she stayed on the corner. Her fault. Her inexperience. She should have realised by now. She got cocky and thought she was streetwise. Wrong again. Lena felt empty. Everything that was within her and of value physically on her had gone. She couldn't go back. With nothing. She knew she'd be beaten or worse. Den was kind, of a sort, but sometimes. He'd got her this jacket. Perhaps it would be better to go back, end it all, have done. But somehow she tried to keep going forward, not back. Destination unknown. There were fewer shoppers now. Lena pulled the ripped jacket around her. She cleaned up as best she could. Standing outside a furniture store window, which had closed early, she tentatively tried to study her reflection in the glass and gently reached up to the newly formed bump on her head. The injury was grazed by brick dust and had little train tracks of sticky blood crisscrossing it. Carefully, she pulled her thin blonde hair over the bump so that no one would know. Lena headed for the park. Sometimes, when she needed to reconnect and just feel at peace, she liked to sit on a bench and watch the children play. It reminded her and took her back, almost as if a kind hand were reaching out through time and reason, connecting with her and taking her to an alternative world, a place she could have been. Sometimes she wondered if this life was all wrong and she was actually living that life, the other one, and that one day she'd wake up. She just wished she knew how to wake up. Lena gently guided her tired, bent body down onto the cold wood of the bench and watched them play. Like little kittens, they tumbled over the multicoloured man-bent steel. Underneath, mats of spongy, unwanted tyres were moulded into springboards to cushion their growing bodies. They were so adventurous. Lena watched them with awe and an envy without rancour. How she wished she felt like that again. The excitement of flying down the steepest slide you'd ever seen, climbing higher alone than you'd ever done under the watchful guidance of a parent, knowing it was your achievement alone, making friends for life with the child you sat next to in class, pinky promise shaking on it and meaning it, and it lasting forever. Lena fondly thought back to her best friend from school. Tricia had always been there for her. Perhaps she'd help her now. But Lena was too afraid to show her what she'd become. She wished she had the confidence to feel like she did at 9, when your best friend didn't care if your coat was yellow instead of pink. Whereas, somehow, now, turning up in a ripped man's wind cheater did matter, and she couldn't really say why. Happy screeches and screams wafted in bouncy airwaves over to her. Lena smiled as she let the sound therapy soothe her. Her heart warmed and she forgot to be cold. "Did you fall over?" Lena opened her eyes to see a little girl standing in front of her, looking her up and down without fear or privacy. The little girl stared at her ripped jacket and turned her questioning eyes back to Lena, waiting to get her answer. Lena smiled. Yes, I did, sweetheart. Clumsy me. My mum said you need TCP if you fall over to put on the cuts and a plaster, but I don't have a plaster or TCP. I have a sweet. A sweet might make it better, the little girl said. Lena smiled again as she said, "Do you know, I think you are quite right. I think a sweet would make me feel better." The little girl nodded in affirmation, as if it were no surprise to her that she knew exactly the right medical solution. Fishing around in her pocket, she brought out half a bag of part-eaten magical stars and passed them all to her. "Here you go. You can have them all. I knew it would make you better." Lena graciously accepted the gift. Despite it being the first thing she'd had to eat since a breakfast of neon pink jam on toast, she didn't gobble it down. Instead, she cradled the gift in her hands and continued to smile kindly at the little girl. In a whirlwind of terror, the little girl's mum descended on them. "Come away," she hissed to her daughter, spinning them around and dragging them off without even looking at Lena. They were gone. Lena wasn't offended. If she had little cherubs to protect, she wouldn't let them talk to her either. Besides, dusk was falling, and it was likely time for the little girl's tea. Lena didn't know the time. She guessed about 5. Den would be expecting her back. He would be angry. She didn't care, though, anymore. Everything she had been taken, and now she was free. There was nothing left to take, just her and the wind. Small flakes of twinkling snow started to fall from the bulging grey clouds lying low over the damp, muddy play park. The kids had gone. Soon people she didn't want to be around would be here. Slowly, Lena lifted her stiff body to standing and willed her joints to hinge and her footsteps to move her forward. She would walk the old railway track. It was well lit, and where it rose to the viaduct she could look out over the city, beyond to the hills, and see the newly fallen snow cleaning the streets and fields alike of dirty mud and smog. Perhaps it would cleanse her too. Lena reached her chapped, red, bony fingers down into the small plastic packet and removed a tiny chocolate star. As she walked, she let it melt onto her tongue. It was delicious. Lena had walked in the failing light until the light was gone, and the snow had fallen thick and bright in the beams of the streetlights. Like fairy dust, little snowflakes swirled around the lamps and landed softly on the ground. Lena had made the decision when walking along the old railway track that she wasn't going back. She wasn't exactly sure where she was going, but now that she'd made the decision that she wasn't going back there, she strangely felt a little lighter and safer. She was free, just like the snowflakes in the wind. Holding out the palm of her hand, she watched snowflakes fall on it. They were so beautiful. Each one was unique. But they were cold. She should shelter. Lena walked back into the city. Rather than walk the slushy shop streets and past the last few preoccupied shoppers, she turned her attention to the suburbs and let her feet wander where they would. Presently, Lena found herself in a smart suburb. The houses here only shared one wall with their neighbours, only one other set of people to know all the intimate details of your fights. Imagine that. Lena shook her head with the unreality of it. She knew it was a posh neighbourhood because the houses had fancy fir trees in the gardens, decorated with multicoloured Christmas lights and racing icicle flashes encircling their roofs. With the thick, freshly fallen snow, Lena felt as though she had entered an enchanted wonderland. Perhaps she'd even find a grotto with Santa and his elves. Lena smiled to herself. Putting her hands inside her pockets, she felt the empty sweet packet, the little stars long gone. Walking up to a dog bin on a corner, Lena removed the packet and carefully placed the rubbish inside, the best that she could do. Lena wandered a little further on until the gardens became bigger and the lights more impressive. Here the houses stood all alone on their own little patches of land, back from the road, far away from the everyday people. Some still had their curtains open, and inside they looked clean, cosy, and warm. Oh, how Lena wished she could be inside. Lena pulled at her ripped jacket, trying to expel the cold winter air, but she would be an embarrassment inside those posh sitting rooms. Better that she was here on the street and still got to look in. Lena's head lightly throbbed. Luckily, the cold air numbed the worst of it. The hood on the wind shooter also kept her hair from the worst of the snow. Her feet were cold and numb, though. Her skinny jeans were wet, and she could feel the cold creeping up her legs. Just one more street, and then, she wasn't sure what, then maybe she'd find a bush or something to cuddle up under to pass the night. Oh, what a street! Lena rounded the corner and saw what she believed to be possibly the best houses in town. Victorian, 5 or 6 bedrooms at least, little turrets, double garages, wrought iron gates much higher than her. Wow! Lena forgot the cold and in awe walked along the fresh snow of the pavement. 1, perhaps 2 sets of prints had gone before her. This was almost uncharted territory, like she was an explorer discovering this wondrous winter land. One house had the most enormous fir tree, 10 feet high at least, covered in large, white, bulb-style lights and silver baubles. Lena was so surprised they'd even decorated the outside trees. She shook her head at the wonder of it. Another house had Christmas wreaths on all the doors, windows, and the front gates. Lena knew she was probably on a camera somewhere, but she didn't care. Reaching her red, shaking hand up to the wreath on the gate, she let her skinny fingers caress the soft, sprayed fir and real slices of dried orange. Then, holding her fingertips to the end of her nose, she could almost imagine the smell of orange, the smell of Christmas. All too soon, Lena reached the end of the road. It was a cul-de-sac. She didn't want it all to end. She also didn't want to go back. Then she saw it, a small metal sign above her head, half covered with snow, stating, "Residence Garden." Around her the snow was drifting, but she could still make out a little path. Boldly, she walked on. The path led around the back of the houses and the house gardens to where the path split in two. One branch led to the fenced and gated large residence garden. Lena assumed this was shared between the homeowners around. The other path led back down behind the houses along their back gardens. Which path should she choose? If she went to the garden, she could perhaps find a tree or bush or something to shelter under for the night. If she took the path behind the houses, she might get a glimpse of the private, wondrous insides of these magical homes. Lena pressed her cold hands into the pockets of the wind cheater, and little bony buttons pressed back along her cold flesh. Furrowing her brow, Lena pulled out her hands and allowed her numb fingers to investigate. All along the lining of the jacket were little hard buttons lined up like tin soldiers. Scrabbling at the inner lining of the pocket, Lena found that there was a small hole. One of the bags of Den's pills must have burst, she thought in wonder, and all the little pills had spilled out along the hem of the jacket. Pulling one out, she stood looking at the little white pill in the near darkness. She wasn't going back. Den would never know. Shrugging, she popped the pill in her mouth and turned her feet to the path behind the houses. The first house had a large glass kitchen extension sprawling out into the large garden. Lena held her face to the cold iron bars of the back gate and watched a happy couple busying around the enormous space. The kitchen floor was of limestone flagstone, which extended beyond the kitchen into an eating area and sitting area beyond. The kitchen cabinets were a pale blue colour, with brushed chrome handles all in different twisted organic shapes. The countertops looked as if they were some exotic white sparkly stone, not unlike the beautiful white carpet of snow that blanketed the garden. There were modern hanging pendant lights made from twisted glass, twinkling their glow onto the counters. A few candles were dotted around, and there were glass vases pouring forth bold flowers, gerbers, sunflowers, and peonies. The dining table appeared to be made of reclaimed oak, arranged as a long table with reclaimed oak benches either side, and a discarded bottle of wine sitting on top. The sitting area had a peach-coloured velvet sofa, which perfectly complemented the blues of the kitchen. But the most stunning thing, the thing which took Lena's breath away, was the enormous orange cooking range that took pride of place in the centre of the kitchen. The happy couple were buzzing around it as it magnificently sat, beaming its heat into the large modern extension. Oh, how cosy it would be to stand with a glass of wine in front of that stove. Lena could almost feel the warmth. Suddenly, the couple left the glass extension and the lights went out. The vision was gone. With a sigh, Lena pushed her hands into her pockets, searching for warmth and comfort. Instead, she found a little pill. Shrugging, she popped it into her mouth and stumbled on to the next house, wondering what she might see next. Lena wasn't disappointed. Another huge extension pulled out from behind the old Victorian house. Despite the base of the extension being of local limestone, the top was again all glass, and there were glass double doors looking out onto the garden. The curtains hadn't been pulled over the glass doors. Lena could quite clearly see in. It was a dinner party. There were ladies dressed in champagne-coloured sparkly dresses and rich dark-coloured velvet jumpsuits. They swayed and laughed beside men wearing pastel-coloured shirts and cashmere V-neck jumpers. The table took up at least half the extension space, and there must have been at least a dozen guests. Lena watched as a proud-looking man stood up brandishing a carving knife and fork, and his beaming husband held aloft the turkey fresh from the kitchen. The guests cheered and clapped in appreciation. Some even raised their glasses. It looked magical. Oh, how Lena wished she could taste a little of the turkey. She could almost imagine it in her mouth. Then the guest nearest the glass double doors got up and closed the curtains. The vision was gone. Lena stood in the cold and the dark, the smell of cooked turkey still lingering in her nostrils. Reaching inside the pocket of her jacket, she pulled out another pill and ate it. She moved on. The next house also had a large extension. Again, this extension was a mixture of limestone and glass, but there were no people inside. In fact, it was almost entirely dark, except for a Christmas tree. A grand, thick silver fir. It was adorned with frosted, pastel-coloured, round fairy lights and pink, green and yellow ribbons. The baubles were all of glass, but some had silver gemstones or faux pearls glued on, and the baubles twinkled in the light of the fairy lights. It was quite possibly the most beautifully decorated, gloriously pretty tree Lena thought she'd ever seen. A real tree. Lena could quite clearly remember the last time she'd had a real Christmas tree. She shook the thought away, but still it came up. She tried all the tricks she could think of, but this thought persisted. Lena sat with 3 children around a Christmas tree. "Mummy, are you sure Santa will come this year?" "I can promise you, darling, he's coming," Lena replied. Another little voice. "But Mummy, he didn't come last year." "Oh, my lovely, I think he just got lost. I promise you." Reaching out, Lena stroked the cheek of her young daughter's face. "I made sure he knows where we live now. I promise you he will come because you are all such good little children." Her daughter smiled back at her. "Now off to bed. He won't come if you're not sleeping. Lena stood in front of the fridge, holding the empty milk bottle. The children were safely snug in their beds. She would just pop next door to borrow some milk for their breakfast. She'd been so busy with the presents, she'd quite forgotten to get the milk. Lena's eyes were wide with terror, and her mouth made the shape of someone screaming, but there was no sound, just the vision. Lena, crazed, desperate, clawing over the policewoman with the kind brown eyes, desperate to race into the inferno of her home. In the window, the Christmas tree stood engulfed in a mass of flames. Smoke and flames gushed from every window. The heat was overwhelming. Lena had stayed away too long. Gone. Lena stood in the dark air and the soft, sparkling snow, her head pressed against the cold iron of the gate, her forehead thumping like a little separate heartbeat. In front of her, the most impossibly beautiful Christmas tree she'd ever seen. Lena craned forward, pushing against the gate. The gate gave way a little and creaked quietly in the late of the evening. Lena looked around the empty alley behind her. No one was there. Perhaps there were cameras. She didn't know. She didn't care. Carefully, Lena stepped forward onto the untouched snow in the garden and walked over to the extension. Despite the darkness beyond, the beautiful twinkling of the Christmas lights illuminated the presents under the tree. Lena could see 3 red felt stockings attached to the thick oak mantelpiece which ran over the top of the modern fireplace, housing an unlit wood burner. Lena could almost picture her children here, their excitement putting up the stockings, checking with her for reassurances that Santa would come, whizzing in circles and shaking presents under the tree, too excited to go to bed, not wanting to sleep. The timer on the tree lights clicked off, and the extension was plunged into darkness. Lena held on to the windowsill and tried to peer into the darkness, willing the vision to come back, but it didn't. The snow was cold and her jeans were wet through. Lena's feet and hands were cold and aching. Still, she willed the vision to return, but reality wouldn't let it. Lena pushed her hands further into the pockets of the wind cheater. Little pills pushed back at her sore fingers. Carefully, one by one, she pulled them out and lined them up along her left hand. 12 pills in total. What did she care? She wasn't going back. Den would never know. Opening her mouth wide, Lena threw them in, crunching down with purpose and swallowing. She tried to imagine that they tasted like turkey. Scooping a little snow from the window ledge, she ate some of that too and swallowed heavily. Looking around the dark of the garden, the blanket of soft, sparkling snow called to Lena. It was untouched and beautiful. It looked so comfy. Stepping into the middle of the garden, Lena lay down and looked up at the sky above her. The snow had stopped and the clouds had cleared. She almost believed that through the lights of the city she could see a few stars poking through. She almost thought she saw a shooting star. The snow was sheltering and soft. Lena felt her tired, broken body relaxed. She let her eyes close and the cool air soothe her fears away. "Mummy," came the voice. "Mummy, is it wake-up time? Did Santa come?" Lena opened her eyes to see her daughter Libby. Libby was just the spit of her, with the same thin blonde hair and bony hands, the same light blue eyes. She was urgently tugging at the ripped wind cheater. Beside her daughter stood her 2 boys, Benji and Jackson. Jackson was only 3, still only 3, and held his brother's hand tightly. Benji said, "Mummy, Granny said we had to wake you up because it's Christmas. You need to come with us. We want to go and check our stockings." There was part of Lena's mind that reasoned this wasn't logical. She was in a garden, lying in the snow. She was cold. But that part of logic didn't seem the most real. What was real were her 3 beautiful children standing in front of her, asking her to come with them. Reality won. "But how can I come, my darling?" Lena asked. Jackson answered, "Mummy, you fly." "Fly?" Libby explained. "Snow angels, Mummy. Do you remember when we made snow angels? We need to do it like that." Lena smiled at her daughter. She did remember when they went sledging and made snow angels. Benji lay down in the snow with Jackson and said, "Come on, Mummy, I'll show you how," and started swishing his legs and arms around in the snow. Jackson was laughing and following suit. Libby lay down at the other side of Lena and said, "Come on, Mummy, you're not trying." Libby's arms and legs were like lead. She was encased in a cold tomb of snow. She couldn't move. Libby looked over to her mum in desperation. "Mummy, you have to try." "I am trying, darling. It's hard. My legs and arms are cold." Libby replied, "But it's lovely and warm when we get there. Please try, Mummy." With Herculean effort, with every last gasp of energy in her thin, bony body, Lena tried to move her arms and legs. The effect was small at first, but as she got into the rhythm, she was able to move her arms and legs further and further, swish, swish, swish in the snow. "That's it, Mummy," said Benji. "We're flying." Dad, there's a snow angel in the garden." Pete opened his bleary eyes to find his daughter tugging at his pajamas, trying to drag him out of bed. "Dad, there's a snow angel in the garden," she said again urgently. Pete wiped his hand over his forehead and allowed himself to be dragged over to the window, to where his son had ripped back the curtain and was looking down at the garden with a strange look on his face. Pete's youngest daughter clamoured at her father's leg, wanting to be carried, knowing something different had happened and wanting the security of being safe with Dad. Pete looked down at the back garden. There, in the middle of the snow-covered lawn, was what looked like the body of a person. They were surrounded by funny marks in the snow. The back gate was open. "See," his daughter said. "See, snow angels. We've had snow angels in our garden." There were indeed 3 sets of snow angel markings in the snow, but the 4th one contained the shape of what looked like a person. Pete swore. "Stay here," he commanded. Then he turned to his son and said, "Michael, call the police and an ambulance." Grabbing his dressing gown, Pete rushed downstairs, pushed his feet into his boots, unlocked the back door, and rushed into the back garden. The pale, blue-white woman was clearly quite dead. No need for an ambulance then. The back gate was open, but the house hadn't been broken into. Pete felt for a pulse, and from the frozen clasped hand fell some small white pills. "Drugs," Pete said to him, almost to himself, and grimaced. He couldn't feel a pulse. Her hands were stiff. The body was deathly cold. To be sure, Pete gently lifted her eyelid just under what looked like a very nasty head injury. She had a beautiful light blue eye with an unfocused, enlarged black pupil. Her eyes were the same blue colour as his late wife's eyes. He closed her eyelid. Quite dead. Behind him, he could hear his son ushering someone through the house towards him. It was the police. A female officer with kind brown eyes stepped forward to assess the dead young woman. "I don't know her," Pete explained. "I don't know who this woman is," he said in his defence. The female officer bent over the body and held the palm of her hand to the side of the young woman's face as she gently said, "No, it's okay, sir. I don't think you would know her, but I think I do." Turning back to the young lady, she gently leant forward and kissed her cold, bruised forehead goodbye.